Welcome to today's webinar on the Thrifty DBA's Guide to Open Source Database Security Tools. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. The speaker today is Stephen Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrigy Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994, and for the past 17 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle E-Business Suite and Oracle databases, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences. And I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. So today's topic comes from a presentation I did several years ago at the Collaborate conference as part of IOUG, and it was the Thrifty DBA Guide to Security. And we have expanded this topic over the years and kind of did different areas. And this is now kind of diving into a couple of specific topics within the tools that the Thrifty DBA would like to buy but can't afford. So therefore, looking for alternatives, especially open source or free ones. And so let's dive into looking at tools that a DBA, especially an Oracle DBA, can use in their Oracle environment to improve the security overall. And this will be a number of open source tools, and I've actually thrown in a couple of free tools also, just to kind of show you some examples of you don't have to go buy and spend a significant amount of money on buying security tools for the Oracle environment when there's actually very good equivalents out there. Because we see for a lot of our clients that, oh, we can't afford that, we can't do that. And it's like, well, you can do auditing. There's actually very good tools to do that. Well, you should be assessing your database. There's very good tools to do that, or actually open source or free tools that are fairly easy to implement in your environment. Before we get into the topic, a quick background about Integrigy for those of you not familiar. Integrigy was founded in 2002 by former Big Six consultants working on large ERP and database projects. And back then, security wasn't being handled very well. And so we really kind of kicked off on how to deal with Oracle database security, Oracle Business Suite security, and we actually now specialize also in PeopleSoft security. We do that two ways. We have a set of products, the first being AppSentry. So AppSentry is a database security auditing tool that will scan your Oracle databases and make sure that they're compliant, checking for missing security patches, default passwords, and it's very in-depth, hundreds of checks, supports the CIS, the DoD STIG checklist. If you're running Oracle Business Suite or PeopleSoft, we have a second product called AppDefend, which is actually a proactive layer of protection for the Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft environments that will block known attacks, unknown attacks, will actually defend the application in real time. So this is a very specialized web application firewall that's specialized for Oracle Business Suite and PeopleSoft. Where this presentation mostly comes from is our services. So we're on site every day at customers, working with them, doing security assessments, compliance work, helping them implement products such as some of the things that we're talking about today. How do you actually do auditing? How do you roll out encryption to a large number of databases, implementing tools like Imperva, Guardium, Audit Vault, Oracle TDE, Database Vault, those types of things. So how do you bring that in? Then also, how do you integrate your database environment into your security ecosystem? So how do you actually meld in IT security and the database environment so those two are working together? That's kind of some of the areas that we very much specialize in, helping clients, especially with large numbers of databases. You've got 10, 100, or 1,000 databases. How do you actually secure that large number of databases? And then finally, we're backed up by a world-class research team that is actually actively working on and working closely with Oracle. We're an Oracle Gold partner, so we're actually working with Oracle on how to improve the security of the Oracle product, especially the Oracle E-Business Suite, PeopleSoft, and the Oracle database. So we're actively identifying vulnerabilities, reporting them to Oracle, but also publishing out white papers and information on how to actually best do this in your environment. What are some of the best practices? What have we learned from hundreds of clients on how to actually do this in a meaningful way? So enough about Integrigy. Let's get into the topic here. So we'll talk mostly about auditing and assessment tools today. Those are really kind of a key focus in that there's actually some very good tools out there that we see not used as much as we think in the market, especially where there's a lot of need and a lot of requirements, and the organizations a lot of times aren't doing anything because they're like, oh, it's too expensive to do. We'll kind of delve into some definitely very good options here. So the first part about Thrifty DBA. So Thrifty DBA is, again, a We've been doing presentations around the Thrifty DBA for a number of years. So the Thrifty DBA doesn't want to spend too much money, doesn't necessarily have a large budget, and they want to save money internally. So what can they do to actually improve security without actually having to spend a fortune? Because as we all know, there's a number of products out there, but you can get into the tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars fairly quickly in an environment attempting to purchase some of these third-party security tools, either from Oracle or from other vendors. So one of the areas that we see most important is auditing, that a lot of organizations have requirements, they should be doing it, security is pushing it, compliance is pushing it. What you should be understanding what's happening in your Oracle database environment. You should be looking at it. So some organizations have auditing turned on in the database. It just gets stored in the database. Nobody looks at it. It's kind of a point of reference if anything goes wrong, those types of things. We really feel that auditing, understanding who's connecting, when they're connecting, what they're doing, and using that for both reporting and alerting really dramatically increases the security posture in your environment. So the first key is kind of around auditing requirements. So most organizations have these, if not all. So you really need to be looking at what security events in the environment need to be audited. There's a significant security challenge and compliance challenge around the access of generic accounts in Oracle database environments. If there's actually any material weaknesses in most databases, it's around that generic access. So if you look at any big applications, be it Oracle Business Suite with the apps account, PeopleSoft with the SysADM account, SAP with the SAP R3 account, there's these highly privileged generic accounts that the password may be shared out. And in some cases, some of these databases, we were working with a client yesterday on a conference call, they have 400 highly privileged generic accounts in their environment because of one application requirement. So we were discussing how are you actually managing these 400 accounts all had DBA privilege. We're like, well, that's not significant, but that's the way it was designed. And oh, by the way, at the end of the day, only 6 people should be accessing those accounts. And our big key question was, how do you know only 6 people are accessing those accounts? There's not auditing. When we did our assessment of that database, we raised this up as a weakness because there wasn't any proper audit trail. You don't know. You can tell me that there's only 6 people, but there is no evidence of that. They could be sharing passwords and things like that. So in order to have a proper control, auditing is there. That's an extreme example, but just for almost any database out there, some level of audit trail is required. And the key is you have to be retaining it. You have to be protecting it. You have to be alerting on it. You have to really understand what's happening there in almost near real time. So if something did go wrong, how would you know? We always ask that question to DBAs. They say, oh, no, we haven't had a problem. Well, how would you know you had a problem? Would you know? Would there be any indication? One of the large healthcare insurance companies was hacked, and the only reason they discovered the hack was the DBA was in a database and noticed that he was already logged into the database, and he wasn't logged in twice, and that's how he discovered that they had stolen his credentials through phishing attacks and other means, and actually were then going through rummaging around the Oracle databases. So again, auditing is a very specific requirement here that almost every organization has and very few people are doing. And if they even have an audit trail, they're probably not reviewing it, alerting on it, centrally retaining it so it's protected and are properly reported on and alerted on. So the Thrifty DBA doesn't like to spend money. So most organizations kind of approach this problem and say, okay, we've got 10 or 20 databases we need to audit. So let's go buy a tool. So our Oracle sales rep showed up and said, yeah, we can give you an Oracle Audit Vault, great tool, works well. But oh, by the way, it's $6,000 per processor license. And I can probably get that negotiated down a little bit. But again, remember Oracle pricing and how that works is the one-off transaction, things like that. Well, okay, if we go outside of Oracle, we could potentially buy Imperva or IBM Guardium. Again, these are very expensive tools. You're getting a very robust, good tool, but it's actually very expensive. And this does not include the hardware, the implementation costs. So now actually adding costs on top of that. So we often see and we often work on organizations that are implementing Imperva and Guardium, and we've done everything from $250,000 of like the total project cost, because by the time you add all of these costs up, to some of these banks are implementing IBM Guardium for $10 to $20 million. So these are can be very expensive tools, and by the time you add in the consulting and the time and effort internally, can be very expensive. So if you're not going to buy one of those tools, what do you do? Well, fortunately, Integrigy is actually going to help you out here because we've published out a free paper on our website. Again, the Thrifty DBA always loves something for free when they can get a lot of value out of it. And this is one of those resources that you get a lot of value out of. So we thought this problem through for you. So we've sat down and actually said, well, if we've got a large number of Oracle databases, how should we do that? And the reason we created this white paper was we get asked this question, and we noticed every single client ran into this brick wall. They said, the DBA says, well, okay, I need to turn on auditing. What should I audit? Why should I audit? Who should I send it to? What should I do with that audit trail? And so we actually thought through that and developed a 50-page white paper that walks through and says, okay, if you're going to audit, these are the things you should be auditing. And then we add in the next layer. Why should you be auditing it? So we even have mapped this out to compliance requirements. So we take it all the way from a very high level requirements definition saying, okay, if you've got these compliance requirements like SOX and PCI and HIPAA and GDPR, how should you map that out? What should you be auditing and why should you be auditing it? Because that's usually the disconnect. IT security, somebody in compliance, internal audit says, oh, DBAs, you need to be auditing. DBAs say, okay, tell me what you want on audit. And they're like, that's not our job, that's your job. And I say, I don't know. I have no reason to know why to do that or what to do that. You tell me, what's your requirements? And so you kind of get in this back and forth. So that's kind of why we put this white paper together and kind of put out a framework. Again, this is a starting point. This is good for most organizations to at least get their feet wet and get going. You'll definitely have individual compliance requirements. Some of these things may be relevant, may not be relevant, but at least this is a great starting point to get the key security events, the key activity in the database. So well, now that we've our requirements, one of the challenges around the Oracle database and auditing is there actually are a large number of audit trails within the Oracle database. So, and then also Oracle's changed. So if you're 11.2 or before, there's traditional auditing. As with the release of 12C, 18C, and 19C, there's also now unified auditing. So you can either use traditional auditing or unified auditing in those newer releases. And again, audit trail goes to a number of locations. So in 11.2 database with traditional auditing, I've got the sys operations auditing, which is going to the operating system. I've got the audit trail going either into the database or operating system files. And then, by the way, I've also got fine-grained auditing. The nice thing as you move to 12C and unified auditing, all this audit trail starts to come together. Not totally, but most of it comes together. So at least I'll get the fine-grained auditing, the standard auditing, the sys auditing all in one centralized location, which makes my job a lot easier. But again, my DB alert log, which may have indications of attacks, are there. My listener logs are in a separate file. And so again, there's at least multiple files. So when you do set up the auditing, this is a little bit of a challenge. So when we look at the tools, and we'll talk about the open source tools, the tools that we're talking about can actually pull the audit trail from these multiple locations. So if you want a very robust view of your environment, you need a tool that can look at these both maybe database files, SYSLOG, and also actually operating system files to pull that data in to get a very robust view. Again, there's starting points. So we want to at least pick off the standard auditing, get that into a database. So if I want to do this the Thrifty way, what are some of the free and open source tools out there? And there's actually some very good tools. On the auditing side and the logging side, from a network and operating system perspective, are very robust, very feature-rich, very functional. The one caveat I'll throw into all this is it's not that mature for Oracle databases. So the data you get in, you're going to have to spend there's a little bit of time, but again, most of the heavy lifting has been done for you. The logging framework, the pulling the data in, the reporting, the alerting has all been done for you. You do have to spend a little bit of time to actually get the data in, make sure you're getting the data in the right format, but that's all very doable. That's kind of some of the tricks we put into our white paper to kind of start you along that way. And there's generally 3 tools that people are implementing kind of for a centralized logging solution. And you may have these already in your organization. So on the call, you may already have Splunk as an enterprise-wide deployment, where now you can just kind of go to the Splunk team and say, hey, we want to start adding our Oracle database data into that. If you don't have anything and you're starting from scratch, there's 2 good open source free solutions, one being Elasticsearch, and it's called the ELK stack because you're actually combining 3 tools together, and now there's a company called Elastic that is now commercialized the product but still supports the open source. So it's still an open source available and you can still install it as open source. And so you install Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, And the Kibana provides the visualization, and the Logstash provides the capability to pull the data in. Another very feature-rich tool is called Graylog, which is actually based on Elasticsearch. And again, that's another security tool and allows you to pull that Oracle data into a centralized logging solution that will give you very robust reporting and alerting capabilities. For the most feature-rich tool, you can actually get Splunk is a very expensive tool normally, but you can actually install a lower grade version of Splunk for free. You don't get authentication, so that's kind of one limitation of it. So it's kind of wide open. So you may have to put some IP address restrictions on to limit, because there's no, in the free version, there's no authentication. But you're actually allowed 500 megabytes a day. And for most Oracle databases, typically we would see you'd have to get up to about 100 to 200 databases to actually even get close to filling up the 500 megabytes a day. Because again, for the Oracle databases, we're not sending massive amounts of data. We're not sending every transaction. We're not sending every SQL statement. We're sending sign-ons. We're sending user creation, alter user, creation of database objects. That stuff doesn't happen that regularly. Really, the sessions are the ones that fill up data. But again, if you have a database with 10,000 database sessions a day, unless it's a very high-end OLTP environment, you're not seeing that much activity actually from any Oracle databases. So even the free version will work well. But again, there's some limitations on it, like authentication. So there's a number of ways to actually get this data into the logging solution. The one we recommend, and there's actually some limitations here, we like sending SYSLOG for a number of reasons. One is I don't have to maintain it as much. Once I set it up on the database server and I just configure the databases, it kind of works. It sends it out. I don't have to be constantly worrying about, am I pulling the audit trail and things like that. Because again, what I'm doing is Oracle database has a very sophisticated capability in terms of sending the Oracle audit trail to the SYSLOG, which then I set the SYSLOG on the operating system, and then I'll actually send up to my tool like Elasticsearch, Splunk, or Graylog. And those will all accept the SYSLOG. And the reason this works nicely is that it works out of the box. Those tools are very adept at consuming SYSLOG. And so all I have to do is go into the Oracle database, set the audit trail to OS, go in and actually set the audit SYSLOG level to local 1.warning, and that value doesn't actually matter. And I can just set it there. And then all I have to do is set the centralized logging on the operating system level in the SYSLOG settings to the IP address of the receiver for the logging solution, and this works. As long as I'm doing this consistently on every database server, I don't care if databases are moving. I don't care if databases are coming up and down. There's not a lot of maintenance once this works, because as long as I'm setting it up and I know from a procedure perspective, this needs to be set up for every database, this needs to be set up for every database server, it works. There's other ways to do this that are more feature rich. So you can also set up like Splunk or Elasticsearch or Graylog to actually log into the database and read this information from dollar, unified audit trail, those tables. The advantage of that is you get a little bit better audit trail because you get a few more columns, because the SYSLOG is fairly robust. It includes most of the columns, but it actually doesn't include 100% of the columns that you would actually find in dollar. So it's very important that, yes, this works. You're really getting what you need. But if you want a couple columns that aren't sent, you actually have to then connect the databases. The problem with connecting the databases in is that then you have to maintain that. So if the database server moves, the IP address changes, the port number changes, the SID changes, those accounts expire, those types of things. You're always kind of playing whack-a-mole to make sure that connection's working. So that's one reason we really recommend SYSLOG. Again, it's easy to set up. This is that first step. You can get the data sent out very quickly, and it works. We've had organizations that set this up in 2 or 3 days. They've been able to do this on every single database. So that's how quickly you can do this, because again, you're just setting 2 initialization parameters, and the data flows out automatically and all kind of works, and it just flows into the receiver. Life is good. So that's the one advantage. This is a very quick startup, get it going. You've got the audit trail into a centralized logging solution, then you can start doing alerting and reporting. The one question that always comes up around the auditing is how to actually, there's performance problems. I can't turn on auditing. I'm going to crash my database. If you do auditing correctly, that is not a problem. And By the way, the SYSLOG auditing is actually the best performance of all the auditing, because you can make it so it doesn't even actually write it out to the disk, because that disk write is where the expense is on all auditing. If you do it correctly, Oracle actually writes it out, and it is never sent to disk. It is just actually flowing through memory, through the queues for the SYSLOG, and the SYSLOG automatically sends it out on the network. So, and that is all an asynchronous process. Therefore, there's nothing that blocks the database. Once it goes out, it goes out. It's all stored in memory, and there's actually not even a disk write that the database has to wait for. So this is very high performance. And when we talk about the Integrigy framework, we're very cautious about what we're auditing. So the auditing performance should never be an issue. Yes, you cannot audit every transaction in the database. You can't audit every SQL against your largest tables that are executed 1 billion times a day. That's not going to work. But if you're auditing key security events, who's logging in, who's creating users, who's granting privileges, those types of things, this works, and maybe pick off a few small areas that, yeah, this is a compliance requirement. This one table that may have social security numbers we want a little bit more visibility into. That's not queried thousands and thousands of times an hour. That works, but you have to be very careful on how you set up auditing, in that you don't cause performance problems, but you can definitely set up auditing with no performance problems at all. Then in addition, there's a number of things that you can do with the auditing that actually adds tremendous value. One is using client identifier. So most of the big applications there's an audit field called client identifier. So client identifier is actually set by applications like Oracle Business Suite, PeopleSoft, and SAP to include the application username. So if you actually have an audit trail that's doing something and you want to capture what actually end user in the application did that, you can do this. And you can actually have your application team do this also. So when they're executing SQL statements as part of the application, they should be setting the client identifier for the application. So you're getting that information also tagged in the audit trail. So not only are we now talking about being thrifty in terms of using tools and making it effective, but I'm also improving my processes potentially here. So another area that the Thrifty DBA is being beat up on all day long by the compliance team or our internal audit is, hey, what's happening? What's happening in the database? We want to know what's actually happening. So yeah, I can actually buy potentially very expensive solutions. And a lot of times we've had clients that they walk in and say, well, we have to go buy, it's going to cost us $250,000 to actually solve this compliance challenge we have because we have all this activity in the database and we can't tie it back to tickets. And we're like, you know, you could do this for free too. I'm like, what? We're told this is the only solution on the market that does this. No, as long as you just go in and you can actually make it so actions taken by the DBAs have ticket numbers assigned to them. Because again, this client identifier is passed from the database to the audit trail. And so if I just have the DBA go in before they do something and actually execute a little package we've created, and we'll call it ticket, and they just pass in the ticket number, and that just does an alter session set client identifier equals that ticket number. And then every single SQL statement that's executed and audited after that, the audit trail then includes that ticket number. And then from an audit perspective, I just actually, and very often we do this with user creation. And it's very now important that you want to know who's creating users. And one of the challenges is, okay, what ticket that user has created, what ticket did that map back to? Well, I can now create 2 reports, one that says all database user creation with ticket IDs. And then the auditor can just sample that. And then everyone that doesn't have a ticket ID, because it was created by an automated process or not following procedure, I can now investigate and see actually what happened there. So now the Thrifty DBA has actually automated and taken a lot of their time away. So they're thrifty in terms of time, also in terms of some of this compliance work that I'm required to do, because previously every quarter I was getting this report from internal audit that said, oh, tell me exactly how all these users were created. And they have to now go through and manually sort that, and there's no automated way. Now this is an actual way. Now I've got this in my tool that I've implemented, like Elasticsearch or Splunk. I've got the data in there, but I also have the ticket numbers. So it's a very simple change. And the same example is now when we're talking about like an application, because again, the application is connecting with a generic account. I don't know what the end user is, but as long as that application is also setting the client ID as part of the application, I can now, if there is a SQL statement that I want to audit, I can actually now capture what end user was using that SQL statement. Now this becomes very powerful because most applications, again, when they're connecting, they're using connection pooling, they're using a generic account from the application server to connect, not the actual end user to connect. The end user, Jack, here doesn't have a database account. Only the apps account as a database account. So all activity is done as apps. All activity in the audit trail is done as apps. I don't know that Jack did something. Now if your application, and again, you have to change the application if it already doesn't support this, but a simple change in the application will now tag my audit trail with Jack, which then makes the DBA's job significantly easier. So kind of I'll jump out to Splunk right here. So I'll use Splunk as an example. Again, this could be Elasticsearch. This could be Graylog or the Splunk free, or again, even if you have Splunk as part of the organization. And Splunk is a query search tool. So again, the data is flowing in here. So now I've actually got the data. So when we actually look through some of this, I can actually now parse out the information. So I've actually got all this information parsed. So again, this is a log off. And I'm actually capturing the OS username, etc. And system logged off and was logged in. We've got a login here. So this is nice information. I can actually do pretty sophisticated queries here. I can actually see action, and the action name here is pretty important. So if I actually search action name, and so again, these are very functional tools, and this is a free tool. I can say action name equals create. Actually, we'll do create user. You have to know the syntax a little bit. So again, now from a simple query here, I can actually see all the user creation. And if I had done it correctly, I would have gotten the client ID in here also, so I know what ticket number it was. So you can clearly see that this user integrity test was created by this OS user, and now I've got a fairly sophisticated audit trail, and I've got the reporting capability. So this query capability here is actually very nice, but what now becomes very powerful is now I'm starting to do dashboards. I'm doing alerts in here, so I can actually now start predefining my dashboards. So I can go in and have a very easy dashboard to say, okay, here's all my database logins, here's all my user creation. And so you can do whatever you want here in terms of dashboarding, and any query you can write to pull up that information, slice and dice it, you can see that data. So one of the things we always want to see is like user creation. So very simple this, and this is a very simple user logins, and again, the same person's logging in over and over here. But I can also very easily create alerts. I can create reports. So I can very easily create a default account login. So I can actually go create it. And again, this one's scheduled. So I'll actually get a report that's sent out to someone for all those default accounts like CTX SYS, DBM SMP. Is someone using those accounts? Again, no one should ever be logging in at CTX SYS, OLAP SYS, those type of accounts. I can do summaries. Again, this is now a pivot table. I can do a pivot table in an Oracle database user summary. So the key here is it's very difficult to do some of this stuff by just keeping it an odd dollar, having it there, trying to write all these queries and stuff like that. Where I've got these very feature-rich, capable tools that are very good at this. I don't have to write all this code. Once I get the data in, it's wide open here, and I can now search for error messages. And so anything that I can do on these different fields, I can actually do very well. So again, I can type in any search here and narrow this down, and then I can just click a button and I get an alert and a report. So again, very feature-rich tools, very capable, and they're free. And really the only cost is a very limited implementation effort and the server time. So again, now with virtual servers, it's actually much easier to ramp this stuff up. And if anyone's running Docker, you can actually just push a button and have a Docker image of these tools running in a matter of minutes. And then just connecting SYSLOG, you point SYSLOG to these tools, and you've got the data flowing very quickly and rapidly. So again, with very limited cost, and that's kind of the key here. So that's an overview of kind of auditing, really the kind of the couple key tools there. The other area where there's a number of robust tools around are around assessment. So there's a number of open source and free tools that you can use to really verify the security of your Oracle database. And the first one is not open source, but it is a free tool. This is one that Oracle has provided. So it's called the Database Security Assessment Tool. It's a free tool from Oracle released in 2018, can be downloaded from their website readily. And you can actually run it locally on each database server or remotely. The one limitation is if you run it remotely, it won't check some of the things like OS permissions and some of the listener settings. Fortunately, we don't see that many problems. So if you decided just to run this remotely, there's probably not that many issues that you'd actually discover on the newer versions of the database. If you're running a 9.9 database or a 10.2 database, you might find some issues, but on 11.2 databases and above, very seldom do we ever find OS file permission issues or listener issues in this day. But this is checking the kind of the basic stuff. So it's a free tool. Again, it's better than nothing. We have our tool called App Sentry, which does about 5 times as many checks as DBSAT. But if you're not going to do anything, this is a tool that you can readily download. We see a lot of people say it's too hard to check all our databases. It's too complex. Well, DBSAT's a free tool. Oracle recognized this gap in the market that people just weren't doing this and needed to do this. So it does show you, are you missing the latest CPU patches? It does check passwords, but it does only have a limited check of passwords. So DB users with that password, again, is a very good check that you can check for default passwords for free, but it's only checking the known Oracle accounts with 1 password each, where a robust tool like our App Sentry tool is checking every single account against 1 million passwords each, which is very in-depth because that's, again, if someone's going to attack you, that's what they're going to try to do. But it's checking the standard. Do you have auditing turned on? Do you have initialization parameters? Do people have excessive user privileges? And it does have a nice little sensitive data search tool. So if you do look for social security numbers or bank account numbers, you can actually do that with DBSAT. The problem with DBSAT, though, is, again, it's database by database. If you have a couple databases to do with it, it's a great tool. Once in a while, it's a very manually driven process to do it. If you have 100 databases that you want to check monthly in an automated fashion, DBSAT is not the tool for you. And you can probably script around and really spend some time doing it, but you're going to spend a lot of time and effort. But a tool like our App Sentry, which is a database assessment tool, automates that process, organizes the workflow, and actually manages all those accounts for you, and those types of things. So again, for a free tool, DBSAT works great if you want, and if you're not doing this today and you actually need to do it, we highly recommend DBSAT. But again, it has limitations. It's only going to take you so far. But again, it provides you a lot of information. So the summary information, again, it's going through all the different areas. It's a little biased towards Oracle, so it says, well, you're not running TDE. You really need to buy TDE. You need to buy database vault. So it's got a couple checks in there like that try to upsell you on some of the Oracle products. So definitely take those with a grain of salt. But again, it's going through the standard benchmarks, similar to what the Center for Internet Security benchmark is, the DoD STIG benchmark. So it's kind of checking the standard basic stuff. It won't find anything out of the ordinary, but it will definitely give you a basic understanding of what's happening, what needs to be changed, if there's something dramatically wrong in the environment. And then it's ranking each requirement, and so it is going through and telling you when the last critical patch update was applied and things like that. So fairly useful there. And it's checking the initialization parameters. The one issue with a lot of these settings, though, is it's very fixed. DBSAT is taking Oracle's security guidance and applying it directly. And then they're trying to reference back to some of the standard benchmarks. But you can't change any of these settings. So if you didn't think SecMax failed login attempts should be 10, there's really no way to change it. So if you decided for your organization it should be set to 20, well, DBSAT, you can't change it within the tool. You can modify the source code because it is, it's not open source, but you can actually see the source code, the source SQL statements being executed behind the scenes. But again, every time you download a new version, it would overwrite those changes you made. So again, it's not very customizable like a robust tool like our App Sentry. So again, DBSAT, very functional tool, very useful, and we'll check. And if you aren't running anything, we definitely recommend you run a tool like this. So there's a couple of different sets of tools in this section that I'm kind of talking about in terms of assessment. DBSAT is truly kind of an assessment tool. It's kind of an auditing tool that'll actually go through and tell you what's wrong in the environment. The next couple tools are really focused in on penetration testing, security testing. These are the deep down, dirty tools that either someone from your IT security team is going to run, or a hacker who's actually trying to hack into you is going to run. So that's kind of the key part. But they're fully available for you to run. And they're actually useful because they're kind of telling you some information that you wouldn't find other places. So it's going through and it's trying to break into the database. It's trying to use different exploits in the database to get in there and do something bad. And so this is kind of a diagram here of what the Oracle Database Assessment Tool does, ODAT, and which is a completely open source. The code is all up on GitHub, and it's a Python script, set of Python scripts. And so it has a number of modules here that start from the beginning. So if you were a hacker trying to break into a database, well, you'd first have to find the databases, then you'd have to guess the SID, and then you have to try to break in and brute force a password. And then once you're in the database, if you have a highly privileged account, then it does a bunch of things that you can actually do to keep your access to the database, steal data from the database, poison the database, and actually do rootkits and things like that. And if you go to the right from the password guesser there, privilege escalation, if you get a lowly privileged account, it will then try to do exploits that will actually then try to grant you that lowly privileged account. Let's say it just has create session. It will go through a number of security vulnerabilities and actually try to exploit those security vulnerabilities to raise the permissions to DBA or SysDBA. So again, a very functional tool intended for security testers, but it's actually an interesting thing as a DBA to run against your database, because this is what somebody's going to be running. This is how they're going to try to hack in and get into you. And so once you install it, the command line's fairly easy. So I'll actually jump out here, and we've got it installed here. And so this would be the command line. And so fairly simple. And so what it does is actually now it's trying to break the SID. Oh, by the way, it found our SID was pretty easy to break here. So EBS-DB, guess that. It's now connected to the server. It's now going to actually try to log into the server. And so it's actually trying all these accounts. And this is a demo database, so we've got a lot of default passwords. And so now it's found all these accounts with all these default passwords. And you can see some of these are kind of known accounts. I'll kind of go up here, and you see MDSys here is an account. ODM, MTR is an account. So again, somebody forgot to change those default passwords. Outline is an account. And so it's finding all these default credentials, and now it's going to try, once it's done with this, it's actually going to try to log into these accounts, and then it's going through it's going to decide, hey, we'll try first ABM account. What kind of privileges does it have? And it's actually now going in through it and attacking the database and trying to see if these security vulnerabilities are exploitable in this database. So again, this is kind of fairly robust, and it's actually doing things. And so some of these, yep, could it create a file? So actually now if you go through the log file that it creates, you'll actually see a file on the operating system where it was able to create that file. Well, for that account, it couldn't. And it's actually trying every single account that it was able to break into and trying a number of different security vulnerabilities. We'll stop that running. So again, but it gives you a good feel about, hey, what's wrong in this database? If someone's going to try to attack this database, what are they going to go after? How are they going to do it? And so this is kind of a good tool to occasionally run against, especially against some test and development databases to see, okay, where might security vulnerabilities be in this? And again, it's a free tool, very easy to run, gives you a very good idea what's happening. Another commonly used tool, and one we especially see when we're doing our incident investigations, is a tool called Nmap, where this is a tool that the hackers are truly using once they're inside your network. If they do a phishing attack, they get into your network, they might be looking for other stuff. They might look for Oracle databases, and we see that. And so Nmap is one of the tools they actually use. There's often many cases where we've actually, working with the IT security response teams, it's like, yeah, they broke in, they used Nmap, they scanned the databases. Do you know how they got into the database? And yeah, they were then using the Nmap scripts that are provided, because Nmap actually has Oracle-specific scripts that help someone break into an Oracle database. And the reason as a DBA you might want to run this is because it then will tell you, it will look for those default passwords, look to see if there's problems with some of your accounts, because using DBA users with that password may not find all those accounts, where if you need a free tool to do that, Nmap's the type of tool to do it, because it will actually then try to brute force those accounts with a longer password list than Oracle provides. And that's kind of the key. It's kind of a different way to do it. Or if you want to find rogue databases on your network, it's also a great tool to do that. So here's an example of the command line. So it's fairly easy to use. All it's doing is I'm searching a set of network addresses here and a set of port numbers, and it'll just go out there and just actually look for Oracle databases. So we've got an example set up here. And so I just type in that command, and Nmap, again, is very easy to install. And after you spend about 2 or 3 minutes, this command line is very easy to do. And just the options are a couple of additional options on how fast it runs, what it's looking for. And again, this is our test network, and it's actually finding a lot of Oracle databases, a lot of Oracle database ports open, because again, we haven't changed the ports here. We run 1521 through 1529 as our internal standard for our test and development environments. And again, it's found those fairly quickly, and this is how fast it runs. And so we'll kind of see what it finds here. It's always fun doing this in a live demo to kind of show you how quickly it runs. But again, this is running fairly quickly. That it searched 360 ports, and now it's kind of going back and actually finding these Oracle databases. So, and the nice thing is, it even tells you, here's a great line, it's telling me that on that port is running an Oracle database, and by the way, it's that version. And as an attacker, I'm probably going to be looking for some a little bit older ones. So I may go back, hey, I've got an 11204 here. That most likely could be not patched. Well, there's still critical patch updates for it. But hey, look at these two. I know I can get into these because, by the way, critical patch updates aren't authorized for these two databases anymore. So it's very nice that it's actually giving you all that information. And then the next step is I run the next piece of the tool, which now will let me brute force the database accounts. So the kind of the key here is, well, if I want to go find databases on my network, typically a DBA probably wouldn't do that. But really the key one is I want to be testing my passwords occasionally. I really want to know if I have default passwords, because when we do incident response, the #1 way people are getting into Oracle databases is they're finding default passwords. The best thing about the Oracle database is it's very hard on the outside. It's hard to hack into an Oracle database unless you have credentials. In the last 5 years, there's only been 2 security vulnerabilities that let me compromise data in a database, in an Oracle database, without credentials. So again, it's very hard to compromise an Oracle database without credentials. Once I have credentials, Oracle databases tend to be very soft and squishy on the inside. So they're very hard on the outside and very hard to break in. But once I get a credential and I'm able to log into the database, even with create session, oftentimes there's a lot of the critical patch update vulnerabilities are in public packages, those types of things. So if there's anything that you really need to focus in on getting rid of, is the default passwords, the weak passwords in the environment. And most often people can get those sometimes other ways. If I compromise one of your interface servers, then I can get the password that's in clear text in a file, things like that. But oftentimes what they'll do is they'll just run a command like this, and this is a very easy command to run. Is once I found the Oracle database, I just need the SID and the port number. I just fire this off at it. And what this tool is doing is going against the Oracle database and just trying all these different account passwords. If I can get into user dollar, I can download the password hashes. There's other ways to do it, but this is kind of the process. And so where this maps now back to the auditing, if I have the auditing enabled, one of the audits we always have in a tool like Splunk or Elasticsearch is an audit for if there's failed logins on CTX-SYS, OLAP-SYS, Outline. If I see those failed logins, I know somebody's doing a command like this, and I can very quickly identify that. And so I can't tell you how many often we actually set up for a client. We set up the auditing, it's all going, it's all working, they're happy with it. Within 1 to 6 months, we typically get a phone call and say, oh my God, the auditing system lit up today, and we got all these alerts, and like somebody's trying to log into CTX-SYS. You put this high priority alert that emailed everybody that somebody was trying to log in this account, and all of a sudden one database had happened, then all of a sudden like 3 or 4 databases had happened. Sometimes it's somebody in IT security doing a penetration test, but some of those cases are actually real life attacks against databases, and that was the only way they were able to detect them, because someone internally ran this command and was trying to get into the database, and the DBAs would have never known otherwise unless they're carefully monitoring the failed logins within the database. They would have never known. But the key is, if you can turn on the auditing, get this audit trail in there, you can stop this kind of attack in its steps and be very quickly notified about it. Because again, nobody really should ever be logging into CTX, outline those types of accounts. And that's a really good early indicator of a compromise of an Oracle database. Typically when we do our incident response, that's one of the first things we look at to see, okay, was there failed logins? And if they have auditing turned on, because there's a number of cases where there is no audit trail, so we can't even look at that. But if our auditing's turned on, that's one of the things we always look at first. And many times we see, yeah, somebody tried to get in. One client, we were able to prove that nobody was able to get into their Oracle databases because they had a detailed audit trail, and we were able to see and track that. We saw that when their attempts, and they attempted a lot of databases, but they were very diligent about default passwords and weak passwords, and they didn't have any, and we were able to not guarantee, but we were able to prove that we couldn't find an indication of compromise of the database. So that was very important for that organization, because they had the audit trail, they had it protected, and it was being sent off immediately. So they were able to see that, yeah, somebody tried to get into a bunch of databases. We had the evidence of that, and we were able to track the IP addresses and see that there was no sessions ever created, successful sessions. There was lots of failed logins, but nothing was ever successful. And what happened, it appears, they moved on to other targets within our organization. Because they had tried the Oracle databases, hey, they're secure, we tried 3 or 4, they didn't want to make too much noise, so they kind of moved on. But that's how it happens. That's what you're looking for, and that's why you're trying to spend time gathering this data and make sure that these things don't happen. Use these types of tools to make sure that you've done it correctly on your side. Because again, default passwords are very easy in Oracle database. Almost virtually every database account created ever has a default password. And if the DBAs aren't changing them, then you can get into trouble. So that's kind of a couple tools for assessment. The next tool here is kind of an interesting one. I kind of throw this out because this is an open source tool. It's kind of a fun one, but it's also kind of a story why you shouldn't save the passwords in SQL Developer. This is also a similar issue with Toad. Toad's a little bit harder than SQL Developer, but again, a lot of organizations are now implementing SQL Developer. And there's this extension for SQL Developer, and this is on GitHub, so this is completely open source. Anybody can download this and put it on their machine, but it also shows you that SQL Developer passwords that are saved within SQL Developer, when you go click that Save Password button, are not safe. And this tool will show you. So some DBAs we actually see have this running already on the desktop because they keep forgetting passwords on different environments. So they actually have turned it, quote, into a password vault. We don't recommend that at all, but we've actually been told by DBAs, oh yeah, I just save all the passwords in SQL Developer and I use that extension and I can see all the passwords if I ever need them. Because then I can log into them, but I also can retrieve them if I need them. So we'll jump out to SQL Developer here. So again, what I'm talking about here is when you go into the property, this is SQL Developer from Oracle, the free tool. And I'm sorry, this is hard to see. I can't make SQL Developer any bigger. But you've got this little Save Password button here. So this Save Password button here will save the password. So then when I just connect, I never have to type in the password. So again, that's saved as part of SQL Developer. And this extension then loads into SQL Developer, and it's called Show Me Password. And you can just see all the passwords for every connection. And again, this is a set of development environments, and so all our passwords are really bad. So this is kind of just some tests. We don't make them specifically bad so we can hack into them and break them and trigger passwords on our accounts in our App Sentry tool when we're testing. But again, that's how easy it is that someone can do it. The key is also if someone steals the connections.xml file and those connection files that have the password stored encrypted, as long as they can take that file off and put it somewhere else, they can still run this tool and grab the data. So it's very important that your developers and your DBAs are not saving passwords, because this is how easy it is to get the passwords out of your environment. So I just kind of threw this last tool, and it is an open source tool, so it's kind of security related and kind of interesting. So that was kind of the Thrifty DBA guide to some of the key open source auditing and assessment tools. Again, I threw in a few free ones that aren't necessarily open source, but all the tools we've talked about are free. They're readily implementable. You can download them for free, use them. There's no licensing cost. And the level of effectiveness is different in between them, but all of them provide some value, especially if you've got some specific requirements. And again, if you're not doing auditing today, there are options for auditing without spending a fortune on it. You can get that auditing. You can put it somewhere. Elasticsearch, Graylog are very feature-rich functional tools, let you do the reporting, that you can get that data out, send it to someone, send off email alerts and things like that. So we've got a few minutes. I will turn it back over to Phil and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Now we have a couple of questions here for you. First one, Splunk has a number of add-ons for Oracle database. Can one of these solve database auditing?
There are a number of add-ons to Splunk that are Oracle database specific. They're okay. The problem with all the add-ons in Splunk that are Oracle specific, and this also relates to Elasticsearch and Graylog, because those tools also have a number of add-ons. The problem with the add-ons is they were written by non-DBAs typically, so they're really not providing you exactly what you want in the format you want them as a DBA would want to see, or even somebody who really knows Oracle. They're kind of rudimentary, basic. They're nice to start with, but typically you get beyond them very quickly. So there is the Splunk add-on for Oracle databases. So yes, I would definitely recommend installing it, looking at it, and using it. But very quickly, you're going to want to start developing your own alerts and reports. And again, once you get the hang of it, developing like a Splunk query or an Elasticsearch query is actually fairly easy and fairly quick to do. So typically what happens is most people start off with the basic add-on and then start writing their own queries, creating their own dashboards fairly quickly, because again, the compliance, IT, security requirements are different in every organization. What they're being asked for on a reporting on a weekly or quarterly basis, they can quickly, in 5 minutes, come up with a quarterly report, which we should take them a couple hours to develop.
All right, next question. Can you use the EBS Oracle HTTP access log file to track usage in EBS?
So very good question. Not very readily, because it's not storing the end user name in the HTTP access log. You can get that information and spend some time and effort to do it, but by the default configuration, no. But you can add that in there. One recommended way that would be very easy is our product app Defend has a significant logging component to it. So it's actually a web application firewall, but it actually dramatically enhances the logging of Oracle Business Suite and will capture that information readily. So we definitely would recommend App Defend, because that provides you a lot of different benefits and would provide you that instantaneously, and then you can actually send that off via SYSLOG in real time also. So there's very good big benefits. Or you can get the end user application information, tying it back to an IP address, but you have to spend some work doing that in EBS.
Next question. Like the SQL Developer password cracker, is there an equivalent for Toad?
Not that I know of. I think there's a couple, if you Google that, I think there's a couple of references on how to do that. But it's SQL Developer, there's a lot of information on, and there's a couple references related to Toad, but it's not as readily apparent or how you do it or as easy to do in the Toad world.
Next question. Can these tools be used with Oracle Cloud databases?
The answer is yes. It becomes a little bit more problematic on how to set it up, where to set it up. But again, you've got full SQL access. depending on where the database is, which layer your database as a service, and kind of some of the things that you're doing, you may have to pull the database audit trail by using the JDBC or SQL connections versus doing SYSLOG. Just depending on some of the configurations don't let you set the SYSLOG capability on some of the databases, but you always have that connection. You can always grant out odd dollar or unified audit trail to be able to read it. So yes, all these tools that we talked about today can work with a cloud database at Oracle, Amazon, or wherever. There's just some caveats, some uniqueness on, you may have to change on how they work, how you do them. But all the assessment tools will definitely work at any of the cloud providers. And the auditing tools, you may just have to pull them in via SQL for the data.
Next question. Which free tool is easiest to use to check my database security?
Probably DBSAT is the one we recommend if you're looking for the easiest tool. But again, there's limitations that as soon as you get beyond a certain number of databases and trying to get the reports, you're going to run into a little bit more of a maintenance issue. It just becomes harder to use. As a free tool, it's great, but when you pay a little bit of money for like an AppSentry, you're going to get a lot more robustness, a lot more feature-rich workflow to do it that's missing in these free tools.
Hang on here.
I think we have a bunch of questions today.
We do. That's the reason it's. Sometimes I enable the audit trail, but my EBS forms stop to work. That was in 12.1.3, now running at 12.2.7, and database at 12.1.0.2.0. Do you know if this version works? I don't know if you can get that question or not.
Yeah, I don't know of any issues with I've not heard of that with the forms of an issue with the audit trail. But we can kind of look into that and see if we kind of find something.
Okay.
Another good question is, can Nmap show the critical patch updates installed or not? Unfortunately, it does not. We wish that would. That'd be a great way to do that. But there's not enough information by just connecting to the database on what Nmap can do.
Next one, are there any tools for managing audits across an organization similar to how SecureSphere or Guardium centrally manage auditing policies rather?
There's really no free tools to do that. That's one area that you can send the audit trail out and things like that, but in terms of actually having the auditing would still be using something like Elasticsearch or Splunk to do the auditing. That would still require you to set up the auditing in each database. And there would be no capability within that to manage that across databases, where tools like Imperva, SecureSphere, and IBM Guardium, the audit trail is actually stored in the policies in those tools because they're not using the native audit trail within the database. So it's kind of a little bit different mindset and mentality. And that's kind of one of the things that we do in AppSentry it's connecting and it's checking that information against the policy and then gathering the data into it. So there's kind of two ways you can do auditing. One is external to the database in a tool like Imperva and Guardium, which are very expensive, or you set up the auditing in each database and then you just flow that audit trail out. So most of these free tools that we're kind of talking about here are all just flowing and capture the audit trail.
Next question. Using other tools, I have to create a database connection for each single database. Does AppSentry require the same, mainly for assessment scans?
So what we've done in AppSentry is there's a couple things we do to help automate that. Yes, we require for each, what we call an asset is a database, we require a connection to each database. What we do to help that along is, one is if it's in something like Enterprise Manager, AppSentry will actually synchronize with Enterprise Manager and synchronize all the databases based on unique IDs. And so if a database moves, port changes, IP address changes, all that information is automatically synchronized. And then the other thing like AppSentry does is it changes every single time it runs a scan, and it actually changes the password. So one of the big issues that we try to address as much as possible in AppSentry is any of these tools that require you to set up a connection to the database, a username and password, they don't do a very good job about managing that process, because if you have 1,000 databases, our rule of thumb is 10% of those databases that you have set up in an auditing tool or an assessment tool will be bad at any time due to changes, expired passwords, account problems, what you name it. And so 10% is a big failure rate. We really work within AppSentry to get that failure rate down to 1% by doing a lot of different techniques about changing the password so the account is always fresh, the password is always fresh, it never expires, syncing with Enterprise Manager to get the latest information in, having just one connection and checking every rack server from that one connection, those types of things. So that is always a nightmare as part of this, and we spend a lot of time in AppSentry trying to solve that problem.
Next question. Are there any open source / free tools for data discovery, i.e. PII discovery and database?
Yeah, for a free tool, probably the kind of the leader one right now is, I would say, DBSAT. It's not very robust. It's just some regular expressions, and it's doing some nice things. So if you just need something quick and dirty, DBSAT definitely will kind of solve your basic requirements. You kind of spend a little bit of time going through the results, but for a free tool, that works fairly well. That's one of the features that we recently added into AppSentry, is that sensitive data discovery also. Because that is kind of one area that we're seeing a lot of demand about within the community, is we need to know where the data is now. And that hasn't typically been as much of an issue. Like I know my data needs to be secured in this one database, but do I need to know where every place a security number is in the database? People are now getting to that point where, yes, I need to know every single table location where that is. And the problem on the tools that are out there that do that is most of the tools just make like a JDBC connection. And if you have a lot, and it's fine if you have a small database and it works fine, but when we're talking to clients and we're talking about 15 terabyte databases and we're trying to run those tools against the 15 terabyte databases, they just don't work. They just crash. And even Imperva and Guardian don't do a very good job on that, because they're database agnostic. They're not going after Oracle and understanding how you use the Oracle sampling, how you do all these features. So DBSAT is one of the more capable ones because it uses some of the capabilities of the Oracle database, like the sampling, to do it correctly, to do it easily. Some of the features that are specific to Oracle, then saying, oh, no, it's just a SQL database. That doesn't work well. And that's where almost all the tools in the market do it. They just say, well, I'm going to do it for Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, Sybase, all the same way. What you need is a tool that goes very specifically against Oracle, understands how Oracle works, goes against SQL Server, understands the uniqueness of SQL Server, and uses the features of those unique databases to make it go faster and more in depth. And that's what we've done with AppSentry. But because we do that, we only support Oracle and SQL Server today, because we've spent so much time trying to figure out how to optimize it as much for Oracle as possible. Because again, we're taking advantage of every single sampling feature, every single query optimization technique to get that information as quickly as possible. We're using the statistics of the database to not go against empty tables, find out column names, figure out column widths, so we're not querying that data. We're doing it as packages within the database. We're not bringing the database information back across the wire to make it go much faster. So there's a lot of things you can do. But again, you have to write it for Oracle specific, and most of the tools out there aren't Oracle specific, so therefore they're very slow, not very robust. They often get errors, they often miss things.
The next one here, I think, is probably going to take its own webinar to answer, but how to restrict DBAs accessing or manipulating audit data, how to protect audit tables / views from DBAs.
Yeah, so we've done some webinars on that, so it is a very robust one. But the key is, that's one nice thing about SYSLOG. One of the biggest problems is when I do the audit trail within the Oracle database, it's getting stored in a table like ODAT, Unified Audit Trail. It's in the database. If I delete from that or change that data, it will actually create another audit entry, which is one of the nice things. But again, the DBAs could just truncate the audit trail. That if they, oh, I did something bad, I'll just go truncate the audit trail, and oh, we didn't have the audit trail for the last 6 months, or something like that. The one nice thing about the SYSLOG auditing is Oracle writes that out immediately. So if the DBA does not have root privileges on the box, which DBAs should not have root privileges under any circumstances on the box, the root Linux or Unix administrators control the SYSLOG configuration. Therefore, if I have it set up correctly, the database will automatically write out those audit trails without writing it out anywhere else, write it immediately to SYSLOG, and then I can then funnel it into a tool like Splunk or Elasticsearch for now protection. The DBA should not have any write access to that tool, and now I've protected it, and that's all free. So very feature-rich, capable way without spending a lot of money. The one caveat is the DBAs can turn off the audit trail. They can now do the initialization parameters, they can turn off the initialization parameters, bring the database up and down. So I can't solve that problem. The only way I can solve that problem is now go buy a tool like Imperv or Guardium. And again, now I'm talking $40,000 to $100,000, $250,000 for a lower end implementation. So if I need to solve that one limited case where, yeah, the DBA still can turn on and off the auditing if I'm using that native audit trail, I can't get around that. So therefore, I do need to buy those third-party tools which then install kernel-level root modules on the box, which the DBAs won't have access to. But again, my implementation time and effort and cost has dramatically gone up.
All right, the last one, and I'm sorry for the last one, and it's probably going to require you getting a bigger hat size. It says, not a question, just a comment. I've been working for this stuff for many years and felt this was an outstanding presentation. Great job, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for attending to spend some time with us this afternoon. And again, be on the lookout for our next presentation, the first part of this next month. And have a great rest of the day, rest of the week also. Take care.